Cindra Kamphoff, welcome to the Mindset Advantage podcast. It's such a joy to have you here today.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to talk to you, DJ. And it sounds like there's so many different people that we know in common. So it's pretty cool to be here today together.
It was destined to happen at some point, Cindra. That's what I believe. You have an amazing book called Beyond Grit. I've went through it once, and now I'm halfway through it for the second time. I want to start with an excerpt in the beginning, if you don't mind.
Sure.
April 15th, 2013, the day I completed my third Boston Marathon. The Boston Marathon is my favorite because it's so challenging. The first 13 miles, all downhill, tear your quads and cause serious discomfort. The second 13 miles include 5 big hills, most notably Heartbreak Hill around mile 21. Those are 26.2 tough miles. But on April 15th, 2013, I crushed it. I owned the course. I pushed up Heartbreak Hill steady and strong, passing more than 100 people. I finished with my personal best time. As I walked back to my hotel 2 blocks from the finish on Boylston Street, I had a huge, shiny smile plastered on my face. Then, suddenly, the significance of the race faded into the background. I heard sirens. Then I learned why. 2 bombs exploded near the finish line, killing 3 people and injuring an estimated 264 others, including 14 who required amputations. From my hotel room window, I could see the terror of the bombs. Hadn't I just crossed that same finish line, the same spot where the bombs were detonated only 55 minutes earlier? It didn't seem real. I crowd around the hotel TV with my husband and our closest running friends to watch the news. We heard there might be more bombs along the course. We wondered if there could be bombs near us or even in our own hotel. We were only a few blocks from where the explosions had occurred. I forced myself to take a few deep breaths and not go to the worst case scenario, but it was hard. In that hotel room, as I sat watching the news reports on the terrorist attack and the manhunt that followed, I went to some deep places. I found myself asking 3 pivotal questions. Why am I here? What difference am I making in this world? Why did I do what I do? I sat in the hotel room and thought about my why, questioning if I was truly following my calling and wondering about my purpose on this earth. That day was a turning point in my life. After it, I started making different decisions with my time, energy, and mindset. I started living. I started thinking and performing intentionally. I started owning my why. This book would not exist had I not been in the middle of a terrorist attack that April afternoon. I would not be a leading sports psychology professor working with one of the top teams in the National Football League, nor would I have sought opportunities to work with some of the nation's leading companies. Sitting in that hotel room forced me to think about mindset. When the worst things are happening around you, what do? When you suffer a deep, gut-wrenching loss or are forced to change direction either at work or at home, how do you remain resilient, strong, and in control? When you find yourself in the middle of change and conflict, do you have the power to see problems as gifts? This is the secret of the world's top performers. Ask any gold medalist, top entrepreneur, or game changer how they overcome the impossible and defeat the unthinkable, and they will tell you that it's all in their approach. It's all about mindset. Incredible stuff, incredible story. Go ahead and take us from here.
It's wild having you read that because I'm just like replaying it in my mind. I think that events, right, we can experience them, but it's the meaning that we create around them. And that was a pivotal moment in my life, a crucible moment, as Bill George would describe in his book, The True North. And I mean, I remember being there like it was yesterday. I didn't know if I was going to get home to Minnesota. I didn't know if I was going to see my 2 boys again. And, you know, for example, even my son wasn't even sure if I was going to get home. Like he asked his teacher, and he was in kindergarten at that time, like, did my mommy get killed by a bomb today? Right. When he had heard about the marathon. And so we all experience difficult moments. And I think we can decide what kind of meaning we want to create around it. And when I got home, it was very difficult first couple months. I couldn't be around loud noises and right, definitely traumatic, but I just kept on trying to understand why I was there. And I read all this information about purpose and trying to find my purpose. And that's actually why it's practice number 2 in my book, Beyond Grit. Owning your purpose means to me just not knowing it, but really living it and reminding yourself of it every day and using your purpose to say yes to things and no to things. And I wouldn't be speaking to you today. I wouldn't have a book. I wouldn't have a speaking career. In fact, kind of before the Boston Marathon, I felt like I was playing pretty small. I was a college professor, and I still do still teach today, but I wasn't getting out there with my message and with my work, right? Which, takes a lot of courage.
Absolutely. So the book comes out, Beyond Grit. I would love to talk about the word grit. It's a word that we haven't talked a lot about on the show. Can you tell us a bit about what is grit? Can it be developed? Why go beyond it? Can we paint that picture a little bit? I know the first chapter is the world's best are gritty, so I'm sure you're very passionate
Mhm.
about it. Let's talk about what does grit mean?
Yeah. Well, sometimes grit gets a bad rep because people think that grit means like pushing until you're ready to fall apart. But I actually think that grit means, sustained effort, passion over time. I like Angela Duckworth's work, and she defines it as passion and persistence for your very long-term goals. And I agree with that. I would add purpose to that, because when people really understand their purpose, they can keep going. We did a study last year at Minnesota State Mankato where we interviewed professional athletes about how they developed their grit. Because it's been described as the number one predictor of our own performance, right?
Wow.
Is to like stay with things over time.
Hmm.
And what was really interesting, DJ, is, coaches, parents have a really significant kind of ability for us to develop our grit. But the thing that surprised me that I didn't expect is that 3/4 of them said that grit actually came from a really difficult moment in their lives. So, like, for example, a parent's divorce or a season-ending injury, or their own cancer, for example. And they said it was that grit that allowed them to keep pursuing and keep on really stay passionate about their goals. I worked with a professional athlete for a long time named Gabrielle Grunwald, and some people who live in Minnesota probably know her or follow running. And she was diagnosed with cancer her junior year at the University of Minnesota, and she actually said it was the cancer that allowed her to become, All-American and become one of the best in the world. So it's all about how we approach those difficulties and the meaning we create around them. And we can decide any meaning we want to create around a difficult moment, just like I did with the Boston Marathon.
So it sounds like the best in the world, they see the obstacles as opportunities. We
Mm-hmm.
we hear that, we say that, it sounds good,
Mm-hmm.
but it can be harder to do in real time, Cindra. Walk me through, what does the process look like when you have somebody like an athlete who is facing an injury? Cancer is a big what's the first steps
Mm-hmm.
that we can walk through to start to have that calibrated shift of seeing the
Mm-hmm.
obstacle as the opportunity?
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because it can be really easy to say this, but really difficult to practice. And I would say, like, give yourself some patience, because it's not easy to do, especially when we're going through the really, difficult moment. And it might take us a while and just be patient with yourself. I would say I use a tool in practice number 9 called Live and Let Go. And I actually think so. My book, Beyond Grit, covers these 10 practices that are based on research and performance psychology. And honestly, I would say, like, number 9, Live and Let Go, is the most difficult for people to practice. And they're called practices because we're not born with them, but we have to practice them over time. And there's a tool in Live and Let Go called Learn, Burn, Return, and it's a great way of taking a step back and asking yourself, what are you learning, and to disconnect yourself from the story that you're creating and learn. The first step in learn just means that you ask yourself, what would I do differently next time? And we want to take more of an objective approach to our failures. So many times we take it personally and we think we are the failure. I love this quote by Jim Rohn, and he said, uh, failure is an event, not a person. And that, that's so true. But we kind of really take it to heart. And then after we learn, many times we can just kind of ruminate on that and just kind of spin on that. But we want to burn, and burn just means that we let go. We have some kind of phrase or action to move on. There's a really hilarious story of Adam Thielen, a wide receiver for the Vikings for a long period of time, and he wrote the foreword of my book. He there's a playoff game against the Saints a couple of years ago where he fumbled the ball really early on in the game. And he went over to the sidelines and he made this action where he was kind of like pushing something down. And, meanwhile, he was right back in the play, next play, right? Kind of this next play mentality. And afterwards, this ESPN reporter asked Adam what he was doing. And he said, well, I was pretending to flush a toilet, And then the next day in ESPN, the headline is mental coach taught Vikings Adam Thielen to flush away his mistakes. It was pretty funny. But what I was teaching him is this tool, learn, burn, return. And he went over to the sidelines and he, asked himself, well, what would I do differently next time? Trying not to take it so to heart, and it's a big thing, a fumble in a playoff game. You could really beat yourself up around that. And so many times, we're our own worst critic. And so he was pretending to flush a toilet, but maybe you use like an action or a phrase, something else to let go. But the return means that we build ourselves back up, that we, check our body language. We remind ourselves we're great at what we do. And so many times we can just ruminate and really be hard on ourselves. So that's one of my favorite tools in the book because I think it's so practical and easy to use.
Yeah, I love learn, burn, return. I coach a similar concept where it's a physical action with a breath and a power phrase. So same concept, Cindra. And I think the biggest thing is that no matter what you do, it's got to resonate with you. And sometimes you don't have a lot of time. In the athletic world, sometimes in a basketball game, it's the next play, next drive. You don't have time to ruminate. In other times, you might have, a weekend to really flush this and let this out. But I think the best in the world are the ones that can let go of a play as quickly as possible. I think of golf for an example. What are your thoughts on the learn, burn, return? There's got to be a part of this where you really have to believe it, right? So I can't just go and flush the toilet, but in my head I'm like, "Oh, it's still there, still in my head,
Right.
just because I just did this motion." Talk to me a
Right.
little bit about,
Yeah.
there's got to be some further, you got to believe what you're doing. I know we're getting past 101 of sports psychology here, but talk to me a little bit about, you got to believe in the motion. You can't just say, all right, flush the toilet, move on, but it's still in my head.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the power of doing something similar over and over again is it does strengthen a neural pathway, and then you're more likely to move on quickly next time. But you're right. If you don't believe it, I mean, there's some research studies that if you just say, I'm happy, I'm calm, I'm calm. Like if you don't believe it, it's, you can't trick your mind. And so, but I do think having some kind of strategy to move on, because if you don't, it can be really overwhelming. And we know you can't be thinking about two things at once. You can't be thinking about the next play and the current play, right? And I think the best are really disciplined with their mind. But it's just like weight training. You don't get strong in the gym by going one time. You get strong mentally by doing more mental reps. And I would say that the best engage in daily mental conditioning, where every day they're conditioning their mind to believe in their success and to support their mind, supporting them, not getting in their way and hindering them.
We're talking about the third practice, the world's best become a master of their thoughts. If you don't mind, I have one more reading. This is my favorite part of the book.
Okay.
Let me take you back to 2012. It was my 10th marathon, the Omaha Marathon. I trained for more for that marathon than any other marathon that I've ever run. I knew I could run fast. I was ready. I wanted to perform extra well because the most important people in my life were there watching. My parents, my two boys, my husband, and my sister. The race started well. And at mile 13, my husband yelled at me from the side of the road, letting me know I was leading the race as the first woman. To win a marathon, I thought, that would be amazing. I'm crushing it. I had a smile plastered on my face for much of the race. Today is going to be my day. That kept going through my head. But then I hit a wall. As I was running up the biggest hill in the race at mile 22, I felt overwhelmed with defeat and could feel my entire body start to work against me. My arms felt tingly. My legs felt like bricks. My feet ached. It was hard to breathe. This might be the worst I have ever felt in a marathon, I thought. The second place female suddenly appeared by my side. I could feel her presence on my right. The ants got louder and louder in my mind. I thought, why did I sign up for this race? She's going to pass me. I feel miserable. I want to drop out. This sucks. All those miles and hours I trained this summer are wasted. I'm not going to win today. She stayed beside me all the way up and down the hill. My whole body ached. My quads were on fire. It became harder to breathe. I was exhausted, thirsty, and hungry. And then, in a blink of a second, I got a little bit ahead of her. As I ran around a U-shaped turn in the course, I got a glimpse of her face. I could see the discomfort in her eyes. She felt the same way I do, I thought. This thought jolted me out of my funk and my negativity. I started to think productively again. She feels discomfort too, I told myself. This is what marathoning is about. You were born to run marathons. My mind flooded with P4 thoughts focused on the possibilities for myself in that race. I planned 4 power phrases because I knew the marathon would get tough, like it always does. For the last 4 miles of the race, I repeated my power phrase over and over. I am fast. I am fit. I am confident. I am happy. I am fast. I am fit. I am confident. I am happy. As I began to control my thoughts, I felt a power shift. I was centered and my mood was improved. My pace followed my mind. I started running faster and faster and faster. Soon I was running my fastest pace yet. I sped ahead of my competitor. I don't remember miles 24 and 25. I was in the flow. Finishing the marathon felt surreal. I finished 4 minutes in front of the second place finisher after being just inches from her a few miles before. As I ran across the finish line, tears rolled down my face, not because I won, but because I had mastered my thinking. I got to the height of my physical ability that day because of my mind. The miles and miles of training paid off because I had decided to think like the world's best. This is an incredible story about overcoming thoughts and being the world's become the master of their thoughts. Can you paint a picture and tell us a little bit more about this?
Yeah, great job, DJ. I think that race was so meaningful for me because a little bit about my own background. When I was growing up in Iowa, I ran the fastest mile in the state of Iowa my senior year. And I had this, big, huge goal of becoming an Olympian. And so I got a full ride college scholarship. And it was actually there where I kept on getting in my own way. And so I would lead my team in the workouts, but in the meets, I would crumble under the pressure. And I didn't know how to master my thoughts. I had a lot of negativity. I was constantly comparing myself to other people, right? Other teammates. And I just felt like I was never enough. And a lot of people get experience this when they're in high school and maybe they're the best. For me, I was one of the best in the state and had a lot of pressure on myself to live up to that. And so most of my college career, I just felt like I was getting in my own way. And honestly, okay, talk about the meaning that you create around that. I actually know that that happened for me, right? There's a great quote by Byron Katie, and she says, "What if everything happened for you, not to you?" Right? And I felt most of my college career, I felt like, why is this happening to me? Why can I not figure this out? But I also know that there was a lot of gift in that. One of the reasons I speak to a lot of young athletes still today is because I don't want anyone to feel like I did. And so just struggled with my own mental health a lot in college. And so it was, after my PhD and getting my master's that I was like, well, could I get back into running and what could happen? And now with these different mindset tools. And so I got back into it after I had my 2 boys. And it was a great way for me just to kind of escape, and to but also I really wanted to see like what would happen. And that particular race, it was incredible because I was able to use the tools I had been teaching others. And I think so many times when we're in the moments of difficulty and struggle and discomfort, right, where I think that Hill represented in that race, we want to throw in the towel. And I remember thinking like, I want to quit. This sucks. Why did I even decide to run this stupid race? And it was this moment where I was like, hey, I'm not the only one that's suffering. And I then I could see that, I didn't get in that victim energy anymore. It was, because I was kind of in that victim energy, to be honest, for a good solid mile up that hill. And then I could choose a different perspective. And I remember, just kind of finishing that race and just, it was like, well, this is the power of your mind, right? You can do anything you put your mind to. I had written my power phrases on my hand in marker, and they just represented to me like when I'm at my best. And everyone can do that, is, take a step back and think, how are you at your best? What do you feel like? And put those into some I am phrases. And that's why I chose those 4, because that represented me running at my best.
I'm a CrossFit athlete, Cindra, and so I get to practice this stuff every single day. I don't know how familiar you are with CrossFit, but it can be very intense and very demanding on the body. Anyway, this last weekend, I'm doing a workout with running and air squats and clean and jerks, and I don't like the running part of it. So when I'm out there, I'm by myself, I'm having these conversations. As the workout goes on, it's getting more and more difficult. Fatigue is starting to build, similar to running a marathon. And I've been coaching this stuff for a little while, Cindra, and what I've a clear distinction that I found is that we have a what I would call a bullshit meter in our head. We know when we're
Sure,
lying to ourselves. So when I'm running,
sure.
saying to myself, "You're doing great, you're feeling good," and all this positive stuff, Sandra, I don't know, it doesn't
Yeah,
work for me. So what I
yeah.
really like, I had the one word underlined here. You said this thought jolted me out of my funk and my negativity. I started to think productively again. So I think there's this huge distinction between positive talk and productive talk. So for you, you didn't feel great, but if you just started to tell yourself, I feel great, I'm doing so good, maybe that wouldn't work for some people because look, I don't feel great. But a productive self talk could look something like one foot in front of the other, get to that trash can, get to this stop. Talk to me about why productive might work more than positive because sometimes it's hard to be positive when you're not feeling great.
I think sometimes we think that, in our culture, we can just say, hey, just be positive. And I think there is toxic positivity, and it can be a really big issue. And so, there are some athletes that I work with that will say, well, actually, being negative to myself or, holding myself accountable, being rude to myself sometimes works. Right. And so that's why I think the word productive is a little bit better because it's like, okay, what's going to work for you? There's another race I talk about in the a book a little bit later, and I was running the Twin Cities Marathon, and again struggling. I think the metaphor is like, the
It's going
marathon
to
is
be
a
hard.
metaphor for life. I've never run a marathon that was easy, never. And I was struggling around mile 17, where I have like 9 more miles to go, and I had forgotten my salt tablets. And in a marathon, you take those in just because it helps you regulate your body. Anyway, I was beating myself up for a good solid, uh, mile. And I'm like, come on, Cindra, this is your 15th marathon and you forgot your salt tablets. And then the pacer in front of me just yelled out, embrace the suck. And I was like, yeah, this sucks. This is really hard. And so that could be negative. And so I guess I would just say for you is what's going to help you continue to move forward. And I do think though, harsh criticism doesn't help. And that's one of the things that I think can really impact a person's confidence. And I think of all the people that I work with, it's something that we talk a lot about. What are you saying to yourself? What are you repeating to yourself that becomes a belief? And being really careful with that. And so talking to yourself negatively to me is very different than harsh criticism, beating yourself up over and over again. And we want to really just be softening that voice inside our head. There's a whole bunch of research by a woman named Kristen Neff who studies this idea of self-compassion. And we actually know self-compassion, being kind to yourself, realizing that everybody suffers, right? This is kind of part of the human experience. And so when we really show ourselves the same kindness and love that we would have to someone else, that actually is linked to high performance. And, I think about my experience in college. I thought the harder I was on myself, the better I would do. But I wish I would have known, hey, the more gentle you are to yourself, it doesn't mean that you lower your standards, but being kind and compassionate to yourself is what's going to sustain your effort over time and help you reach your potential.
I want to dive a little bit deeper into that. I love that. So the myth was, because I hear this too. The myth is the harder I am on myself, the more critical I am on myself, the better I will perform. I've heard that. I want you to go deeper on that.
Well, I think what's important about that is like this idea of self-compassion means that you're kind to yourself. Like you're your own honest friend, your best friend, right? So you're not lying to yourself, but you're kind to yourself. And I think, my experience in college was, hey, the harder I was on myself, the more I compared myself and that I didn't measure up to other
Yes.
people,
Hmm.
that the better I would do. But it just decreased my confidence. And I want you to think about confidence like a bank of money. We want a whole bunch of money in that bank account, especially as we're really pushing ourselves to like do courageous things, right? And confidence, again, has been described as like one of the most important predictors of our performance is our belief in ourselves and our and so when we're really hard and critical of ourselves, then we decrease our confidence. And I have two sons, DJ. One's 14 and one's 16. Okay, so they're right in the middle of all of this, and they play lots of different sports. And my 16-year-old said, well, to me the other day, well, Mom, if I don't compare myself to the other players on my team, like what kind of standard will I reach, right? And we were kind of talking about comparison, and typically we never compare our whole self to someone else, right? It's just like the things that we most want about that other person. We don't, right? And so if we're constantly comparing ourselves, we're not measuring up. And so I try to take a step back, and when I notice myself comparing, I have a friend who is an incredible marathoner who I would compare myself a lot to for many years, right? And I just took a step back, and I thought, gosh, I'm just feeling like I'm never enough when I think about her, right? And I was like, well, what can I learn from her instead? What is this really telling me? And maybe it's telling me, hey, I wanna be more fit, or I wanna try these different races that she's running, right? And so I think it's like, take a step back and ask yourself, what's this comparison really telling you about your desires or what you really want? But it's so much more healthier to compare yourself to your progress than to someone else.
I love it. You mentioned another statement that's popped up a couple times in the book. You have some T-shirts that say it too, is "I am," and there's a graphic on here. Again, I'm in the middle of writing my book right now, and we're going through graphics, so my eyes are drawn to specific graphics. But this is probably the best graphic that I've ever seen. So this is so cool. I've never seen this before. Chances of success: 0%, I won't. 10%, I can't. 20%, I don't know how. 30, I wish I could. I want to. I think I might. 60%, I might. 70% I will, 80% I can, 90% I am. There's a lot of just confidence that comes out when you just, read something like that. But why is I am at the very top? Why is it so important? It's got to mean something to you with being on some of your gear.
I think it's so important to me because I am shapes your identity, and you act according to your identity. So what you think about yourself, you become more of. DJ, here's a great example. I used to allow myself to believe that I am terrible at learning people's names.
Mm.
And I would hear myself say that, right, to myself a lot. I wouldn't necessarily say it out loud, but I would hear it in my mind and I would believe it. And I think the most important thing is that we shouldn't believe everything we think. All right. And it's only when we give power to it that it impacts us. And so when I started to believe I was terrible at learning people's names, I wouldn't even try to learn people's names. And then of course I wasn't great at it because I believed that about myself. And so we can be really intentional and purposeful about creating our identity. About 5 years ago, I decided to write just some statements about myself that I wanted to believe more about. Like I wanted to kind of step into those ideas and those statements and those beliefs. And so every single morning, I still do this. I read some of these statements that I have, and I have like 30 statements. And one was, one is, for example, I learn like I change a million people's lives. Right. And so just this idea of like, hey, I want to keep learning and growing and building my own knowledge. And another one is I'm one of the best keynote speakers anyone has ever heard, because that's what I want to continue to grow into. And I'm loving with my family is another one. And so now I look at some of those statements and I think, well, I actually am those. Right. And so I think there's really power in taking a step back and saying, well, what do you want to believe about yourself? And what kind of identity do you want to create? And then being really intentional about that. And so I am is powerful because it shapes your identity and it's basically who you become.
And there's a distinct difference even between the last three. So 70% I will, 80% I can, 90% I am. Even those three, I mean, those three are great. If we're 70%, that's good. But there's a real difference in how you feel when you say the difference between I will, I can, and then I am. I mean, I don't know about you, but there's just something different about those two words that are different than will and can.
I think I will isn't really a statement about your intention, like what you intend to do. And
Mm,
that's powerful too.
mhm, mhm.
Um, I have a grit morning routine that I talk about that people can get. I think it's at beyondgrit.com/morning. And so it's four kind of components. One is called gratitude. So for a minute, you think about what you're grateful for, the small things and the big things. R stands for remember your why. Why is it that you do this work? And then I is your intention. And the way I talk about intention is that you just think about who do you intend to be that day, right? And less about like, what do I want to do? Or I want to have this podcast with Cindra, but more about like how I want to show up in this podcast, right? And that's powerful. The first time I did this morning routine, I thought to myself, I set an intention that I want to be fully present at my son's basketball game. And once in a while during breaks, I'd take out my phone and look at my phone, right? And I didn't do that. I was fully present. I put my phone in my car, and he even noticed at the end of the game, right? And so that's the power of really setting your intention. And then T stands for talk to yourself, and that's kind of what I was saying is really being deliberate, writing out what do you want to say to yourself, and then really like saying those things to yourself every morning so you become more of who you want to become. Not that you're not enough as the way it is, but we can intentionally shape our identity to help us, step into our courageous goals.
You said a powerful word there is presence. And I love what you said in your book and a couple of your keynotes about our brain can only be in three spots, either the future, the present, or the past. Talk to me a little about, what do those three mean? And then how can people be more present? I think now more than ever, we're hearing that more than ever. People want to be more present. It's harder to be present because there's more distractions, etc. Talk to me about presence.
I think it's so important, why it's practice number 6 in my book called Own the Moment. Because when you think about an athlete and peak performance in general, it can't happen when you're focused in the past or the future, right? It only happens in the present moment. And that's why, there's tools around taking it one play at a time, and why focus and present moment focus is so important for an athlete to develop. I think what's also powerful about that is, in the future, that's where we experience a lot of pressure or anxiety. And so when I'm working with an athlete, there's a pro golfer I'm working with right now who I'm just thinking about as I'm talking about this, that he will focus a lot on the future, and he'll think a lot about his future rounds and this weekend. And he just feels so much pressure when he does that. And there's so much anxiety around that. And so when I think what's helpful is just to recognize, hey, where is my mind right now? And then is it in the past, kind of ruminating on mistakes? Is it in the present, or is it in the future? There's so many different tools that you can use to be in the present moment. And I list a whole bunch in my book. I would say what is most important is just kind of noticing where your mind is and gently getting it back to the present. Sometimes people will use like the 5 senses exercise where they kind of check in with their 5 senses. Okay, what are they smelling? What are they seeing? What are they tasting? Even just looking around the room to get back to the present when you're distracted can be helpful. And then I think there's more and more research about the power of mindfulness and meditation to performance. And there's a lot of Olympic athletes that I work with who do meditation every day. Just 5 minutes can help you train your mind to stay in the present moment. And so I just think it's crucial to flow and to peak performance in general, but really hard because we have these phones in our pockets, or right next to us that are constantly like distracting us.
Totally. I think you said in your book or at some point that our best self is in the present self. So when we're looking back, it's usually negative, regret, things like that. And in the future, there's more pressure, anxiety, those types of things. But we're our best self when we're present. And something that works for me, Cindra, is that I think about be where your feet are. And so when I'm not feeling present, it sounds silly, but it works for me. I look down at my feet and I go, this is, it's almost like a natural, this is where your feet are. This is where you need to be. You said there's a several dozen tools in the book. Any other ones that you'd recommend for people that in the spot to be a little bit more present?
I think one important tool would be the breath, because you're always breathing, you always have your breath with you. And so I typically have the athletes and the executives I work with like count with their breath, because then you can't think about what's making you anxious and we are counting at the same time. So there's different ways that we can do that. Sometimes people use like a 4-4-4 count. So breathe out, in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. There's different tools. I think in the book, I called it like a 15-second power breath, where it's like 7 seconds in, hold for 1, and 6 for out, for 6 counts for out. I think what's important is to notice where your mind is, and I think the power, or the power breath, can really allow you to stay in the present and reduce that anxiety. And so many times our anxiety is more about our interpretation. Excitement and anxiety feel the same in your body, regardless of what we're thinking about it. And so it is really our interpretation. Are you thinking, oh, I'm ready for this, I'm excited for this? Or is your mind saying, oh crap, I'm not ready, or oh crap, this opponent is so much bigger or stronger or faster than I am?
Right. Do you have any other examples from, you mentioned the golfer, any other players that, whether it's, hey, in a huddle, I don't feel focused, or maybe it's in the pregame, I don't feel present or focused. I'm just trying to give a little bit more texture to the athletes out there. Maybe it's an in-game situation where I feel a little bit distracted. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, there's so many different examples that I could give you. There was a softball player I worked with once who said, hey, when the national anthem is playing, all I can think about is all the times I've messed up.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I even work with pro athletes who will, NFL athletes who will say, it's really hard for me to when the national anthem is playing, or when there's a break in the play, not for me to like think of the worst case scenario, right? And so I think awareness is always the first step on noticing when you're having those thoughts. And then guess what? Your mind is, again, the main purpose is to keep you safe, not here to help you be a peak performer. So just notice that thought. You can decide if you're going to believe that thought or not. There's this is a simple explanation, but in sports psychology, there's kind of 2 schools of thought. One is called the cognitive behavioral kind of way of addressing thoughts, where you notice your thought and you change it. Another one is called acceptance commitment therapy, where you notice the thought and you might let it move out of your mind like a cloud, or you might picture a stream and the thought on a leaf, and it going down the stream. Like you get to decide how you want to interact with those thoughts. But just because you have that thought doesn't mean that you have to give it power, or there's something wrong with you. They're automatic. And so even when I'm on stage, there's moments where I'm like, are they going to like me? As I'm standing up there. And guess what? I don't have to believe that. And if I'm coming with my heart, and if I'm like really on stage with my heart, that's what shines the most.
I'm curious, what was the resolution with the softball player? That's a unique situation for that I've heard. So before the game, listening to the national anthem, and there's butterflies, and they think about all the errors that they've made. What did you do, Cindra?
So we actually talked about a tool in my book called the power pause, and it's some power breaths plus some power phrases. And so she really thought like the breathing and the counting really helped her. And so that's one of the tools that we used. Sometimes athletes can also use distraction. There's an athlete I worked with many years ago who came to me, who was in 4th grade, and his mom called me, and he was puking before his football games. And think about a 4th grader, like just you play football because you love football, and as I uncovered what was going on, he would wake up at like 6 o'clock in the morning, and he'd be so excited about football. And he would just be thinking about football until like 10 o'clock. So for 4 hours, he would be thinking about football, and he would get himself so worked up because he was so excited about it that on the way to the games, he would actually like ask his mom to pull over, and he'd puke outside the car and then get back in. And so by the time he got to the game, he was completely drained because he had been thinking about football. And so what we actually said was, I talked to him about the things he likes to do. And he said, well, I love to play games. So I said, okay, how about you wake up and eat some breakfast and you play some card games with your mom and your dad and and so for a couple hours he'd play games, and it was just like a distraction. So even Olympic athletes that I work with, this can be a really important tool because they get to the Olympics and they're there for 5 days before they compete, and they can just like overthink, right? And overthinking is actually a really big issue in our culture. There's a lot of, when I ask people in my audiences, what percentage of people overthink things? And at least, 3/4 of the audience raises their hand, at least, right? And so we all need strategies to release what's going on, learn, burn, return, get back in the present moment, because we just have this mind here that doesn't always help us.
It almost seems like there's a little bit of a spectrum I'm learning. Like too much thinking is too much, but not enough obviously not good either. Too much present moment at the wrong time cannot be good, but none of the present moment awareness. There's really a spectrum to a lot of this stuff, isn't there, Cindra?
Well, I think so. A really good question. I think, usually I have like I'm thinking about an example of the Olympians I work with, and I'll tell them, and maybe this goes back to like the outcome and process focus a little bit. Our mind is best when it's in the present and focus on the small steps that we want to accomplish. And so when I'm working with an Olympic athlete, I'll give them a rule and I'll say 24 hours before the event, you can think about winning, and you can think about crushing it, and you can think about the outcome. But 24 hours before, I want you just to imagine the process. I was listening yesterday to an interview with Michaela Schifrin. And so Michaela is one of the best downhill skiers in the world. And she said every time that she imagines winning and thinking about winning, she never wins, because she just gets further away from that. And winning, actually thinking about that a lot, creates a lot of anxiety and pressure. And that's actually something I wish I would have known as a college athlete, because I thought, hey, if I'm on the starting line and imagining winning, that I would give myself more chances of winning. But it just created so much pressure and anxiety that in the race, when someone passed me, I would drop out. And literally there were races I dropped out of because of my own negativity, right? So I just had a lot of talent, but kind of just couldn't figure it out in my own head. And so we have to be careful about the outcome and focusing on that a lot, because we actually can't control winning. And that's really important to recognize.
I had Chris Norton on my show the other day. Chris went to school at Luther College in Iowa. You might probably heard his story before. I was paralyzed and overcome paralysis, and he ended up walking across the stage to receive his diploma. Anyway, powerful story, tearjerker. One of the things he
Wow.
said in our time together was, "Your future will take care of itself when you take care of today." Your future will take care of itself
Cool.
when you take care of today. And for him, he was just trying to go literally one step at a time. He wasn't talking or thinking about walking across the stage. It was like, man, all I want to do is take one step today. So your future will take care of itself when you take care of today. I think that's a great kind of just highlighting imagery there of process over outcome. Cindra, as we close down, there's another chapter I love. It's chapter 7, the world's best choose empowering emotions. The reason why I really like the way you put this, Cinder, is because the word choose. I thought this was really empowering, is that you have the choice. So there are several. I'll name them off. Why don't you talk about two of them? So choose positivity, choose confidence, choose happiness, choose gratitude, choose to imagine greatness, choose to create your own energy, and choose your friends wisely. Why don't you pick a couple that you'd like to talk about?
Yeah. Fun. Okay, perfect. I chose the word empowering instead of positive or negative, because I think we have to be careful at labeling our emotions as positive or negative. And every emotion is meant to be felt. And so I chose empowering because, we can choose our focus, and our focus can impact how we feel. So for example, if, later today, if I'm thinking of all the things I got to do and how overwhelmed I am, I mean, I did leave my laundry room really dirty, and there's a whole bunch of clothes I have to fold, but right, I can feel overwhelmed just like that fast because of where my focus is. And so I think of the two that I'd like to choose, I think are confidence and energy.
Perfect. Let's go.
And I think of energy like a power plant, and that you don't, a power plant doesn't have energy, you generate it. And I'm working with teams. It's a really fun thing to do. I'm thinking about, for many years, about 10 years now, I've worked with the Maverick football team. I live in Mankato, Minnesota, and I work with their football team. And we talk about like having a momentum guy on the sidelines that produces momentum. And the way I kind of think about it, I use this WAVE acronym in the book. That's like, can we wake up our actions, our voice, and our energy to create momentum? And I think of, there's some research in sports psychology that positive momentum equals positive performance, negative momentum equals negative performance. And a lot of coaches will tell me, well, Cindra, I think a big play has to happen before we generate momentum. And I'm like, well, a big play can impact momentum, but can we impact momentum by our energy? And that's really, really fun. There was, I don't know if you ever heard of this story, but one Thursday I worked with Maple Grove football, and the next Friday, the next day, we were actually talking about momentum, and we were talking about learn, burn, return, and moving on really quickly. And we were talking about moving on that fast, right? And just kind of like what the story I was talking about related to Adam Thielen. And they scored 3 touchdowns in less than a minute. Which is unheard of, right? And all the guys in the sidelines were like, how fast, that fast, right? Like they're just generating momentum, and it was, unheard of.
Love that.
So I think we can generate our momentum by waking up our actions, our voice, and our energy. And then I guess the last one I would talk about is confidence. And what's really interesting, DJ, is the more I work in this field and the more I work with really highly successful people, if it's executives, business owners, vice presidents, CEOs, I just think like there's a lot of things that can shake our confidence. And that's why my next book is going to be on confidence, because we can choose to be confident. It's really difficult in moments where there's a lot of negativity or a lot of pressure, or people giving us tough feedback. But I want you to think about confidence as something that you have to continue to nurture. And people think that, confidence has to come from what my coach says or what my parent says, or great feedback from an employee. But it's really a decision we make. And I think one of the most important things we can do is, how we talk to ourselves about our experiences and about ourselves. And can you continue and just to be really careful about what you're saying about yourself when things don't go perfect.
Yeah, it almost sounds, and I'm teaching this similar stuff, Sindra, but when you say the words choose confidence, it almost sounds like a paradox. You're like, wait, choose confidence? I thought I have to wait for something to happen. But really, to me, you choose it by what I call the BFS. It's your body language, your focus, and your self-talk. You can choose those things. And for some people, hearing that confidence is a choice is kind of like, well, are you sure? I thought I have to be able to score a touchdown first, then I get to feel confident. And sometimes we don't score a touchdown, so then we don't feel confident, or it's too late in the game, where we have the choice on how we want to act. Acting changes everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's hard to say, right? Like in times where I don't always feel confident, and if I even tell myself, hey, I have a choice right now, that's really difficult, right? And so, I would just be patient with yourself. But I think the most important thing is that confidence can be nurtured, and how the world's best do question their confidence. And I think we think that it has to be like unshakable, but there are times where your confidence can waver. And I think that just means that you're human. And so can you get back to your preparation and your past performances? I think about the research on confidence and actually what predicts it. And there was an Olympic athlete I worked with for the Olympics in Tokyo, and she was struggling with her confidence, even though she had been to the Olympics before, because her season just wasn't going the way that she wanted it to. And so we made like a confidence board, and she had a whiteboard in her kitchen, and that she would actually put tangible evidence up there about times that she had been successful in the past, or she had a great workout. She put it on her confidence board. And it was just this visual reminder of like, hey, I got this. I
I've
should
done
believe
this.
in myself,
Mhm.
and we can really forget that.
Can,
So,
yeah.
I'd encourage everyone to do something similar.
We certainly can. It's you took the words out of my mouth. We can forget those things. It's sad and unfortunate, but the human factor of us is that we tend to forget the wins, small or big. We remember the losses and the negativity. So a gentle reminder of, hey, writing things down. It's not arrogant. It's being able to remember, hey, I've done this before, or these are the things I've done. So it's a little bit sad sometimes how we forget the wins in our life.
Yeah, and I would describe that as just that we have a negativity
Yeah.
bias, and
Mhm.
so negative events get stored more quickly and they linger longer. And so, as humans, we are really, think about where we came from, and we had to fight animals to stay alive, right? So the ones that had the most fear, cavemen, right? They stayed alive, and the people that maybe didn't have as much fear didn't stay alive, right? And so, I think what's important is to recognize, hey, my mind, your mind is programmed to see what's wrong. I wish I would have known that in college, to be honest, because I thought that I was alone, and there wasn't as much, there were no podcasts, there were very few books that were practical to read in sports psychology. They were research based books. There wasn't these books now that we can read and say, oh, okay, that's why I'm negative right now. I'm not alone. And I guess I wish I'd have known that at the time. Is like, hey, my mind is programmed for the negative, but I can choose my focus right now.
Love it. Great answers. All right. I like to close down with a similar question for all my guests, and it's just an advice question. So, for you, Cindra, what advice, if you were to boil it down to one piece of advice for the listeners out there to gain the high performance edge? What's one thing, one piece of advice as we walk away and close down this conversation?
I think that the best athletes and leaders every single day program their mind for success. They engage in daily mental conditioning, which means to me that they start their mind off right, with a positive focus. So just think about, like, how do you want to do that? Do you need to listen to something positive? Do you want to do something like the grit morning routine, or there's other morning routines? And then I guess I would just say, like, throughout your day, not believing everything you think, because your mind's real function is to keep you safe, not here to help you be a peak performer or to help you reach your dreams. And so, you know, uh, just realize, hey, sometimes what I'll do, DJ, is a thought pops into my head, and I'll be like, oh, well, that's kind of a funny thought. I don't need to believe that thought, and just, you can laugh off those thoughts, because you don't have to believe it all. And I think that's really important, so that, you continue to step into big goals and do what you were meant to do and live your own purpose.
Did a phenomenal job. For my listeners out there, Beyond Grit, 10 Powerful Practices to Gain the High Performance Edge. You can get this book wherever you get books or on Cindra's website. Where else can I point my listeners to best support you?
Cool. You can head over to Dr. Cindra, so DrCindra.com. I have a company called Mentally Strong, and we work with athletes and leaders and administrators, like educational administrators and CEOs. So if you want to learn more information about that, you can go to mentallystrongconsulting.com.
Cindra, thanks for taking the time. It's a lot of fun.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's super blast.